Mary Catherine Ham, Brian Wilson, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you, the Morning Majority.
105.9 FM.
And AM 630.
WMAL.
6:07 on the Morning Majority. Brian Wilson, Brian Neiman, Mary Catherine Ham here, talking to Peter Morici, economics professor at the University of Maryland. How's it going, Peter?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm happy.
Want to ask you about Tim Geithner had to admit in testimony that probably we're going to hit the debt limit sometime this year. Senator Portman of Ohio, former OMB guy who knows his numbers, thinks it will be October 15th-ish, which would be fun for everyone pre-election. Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea when we might hit the debt limit?
Well, I would be inclined to believe the man from the OMB simply because the deficit is much larger this year than was projected. Who's surprised? I mean, the president's budget last year was full of rosy assumptions about growth, which have not come to fruition. Next year it's the same thing. So we have a deficit of about $1.3 trillion, a little bit more, rather than a deficit of a tad under $1 trillion. So that's like a 35% difference. I mean, that's going to bring you into the ceiling, much sooner than after inauguration as originally planned.
So we get to have a fight about this.
Right, exactly. We're going to have a mud fight over the deficit, and it is going to be a negative that the president really can't avoid if Mitt Romney or whoever is the nominee has his wits about him, and that is becoming a big if. Because I would be standing there with his projections. I would just say, well, here's the piece of paper from which you gave us, and we voted on the basis of this, and you went and spent an extra $300 billion. Where did it go, Mr. President? Of course, that's kind of a rhetorical question, but that's how you play the game.
I want to ask you about the Dow, which, let's just admit it, it's a psychological thing. It's not the most important economic indices to tell us what's going on in our economy, but a lot of people look at it, and it's poised right now. If things go well, another day or two, it could break the 13,000 mark. Do you see that as a significant matter, and what does it really mean, and what's the long-term outlook for the market?
Well, the market's being driven by stronger profits. Now, to date, companies have been accomplishing stronger profits by cutting costs. The bottom lines have been growing more rapidly than the top line, and that's no surprise given that productivity growth, by and large, has been strong through the recovery, but sales have not grown rapidly because it's been a weak recovery. That can't continue indefinitely. Sooner or later, you run out of people to fire. Even if you were Mitt Romney, you'd run out of people to fire. And so the economy has to grow more rapidly for profits to continue the performance they have had and has fired this market. My feeling is that the economy is starting to show, bad news for the Republicans, more ginger than we expected. And if it continues to do that, these guys might have another quarter or two in exceptional profit growths in them, and that the market can continue upward. I don't see us, say, going from 13,000 to 15,000 or anything like that.
Some people have suggested that will be the case.
I understand that, and that could happen. It always can. However, there's going to have to be an improvement in the economic environment and the outlook for the U.S. economy. Now, American firms make half their profits abroad. Read China. But China's giving foreign firms an increasingly difficult time. And it is finding it more and more difficult to keep up its hyper growth. A lot of the growth over there has been paper mache, or should I say empty concrete towers in the sky, pushing provincial governments to borrow money to put up skyscrapers that nobody uses. And the Chinese banks are now, being pressured by their government because they're state-owned to roll over loans. There's problems in China. Leave it at that. So it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to do that.
All right. I know you're not a huge fan of the payroll tax extension. Here's what I want to get at, though. There's discussion about it's $100 billion that's unpaid for, but is there really a Social Security trust fund? I mean, I know there is one in theory, but in reality, is there one?
It really is over there, and they really do have. But what's in the fund? It's U.S. government bonds. So at the end of the day, if the U.S. government, can't pay its debt, says it has to start cashing in those bonds, which is going to start happening in a year or two. I mean, already we're living off the interest. We're not, but in a couple of years we won't be able to put new money in. We'll have to see what this year's Social Security report says. At some point, if the government, it gets into a California situation where it can't, raise enough money and raise enough taxes, then Social Security is one of the programs that's in trouble. By the way, be clear. Social Security was never intended to be an investment fund. It started making payments to 65-year-olds a couple of years after it was established. So they couldn't possibly have put in money in advance.
Oh, sure.
It's an intergenerational transfer program. That's all it is. Moreover, most pension funds on a national basis are. At the end of the day, you have the GDP, and the workers have to give money to the old people to keep the old people off the street. Now, the only thing you can do to really make it better long term is to require people to work older. And they answer stage right Morici's very unpopular proposal. Social Security retirement should be 70.
Oh.
Well,
no, you're
look
killing
at how
me.
people are living. I'm older than all of you, and I'm up early in the morning working with you right now. The people they have in the ads complaining about bursitis in their shoulders
That's
tend
right.
to be 5 years younger than me. And I put in iron days.
Well, but here's the deal: you can retire before the age of 70. You're just saying, hey, you
just
can't
take a penalty,
you can't
right?
take your Social
Yeah.
Security
Well,
until you're 70.
the penalties are pretty.
Well, no, I'm not talking about the penalty. I'm just saying, hey, if you've done it the right way and you have a 401k, you can still
Yeah.
retire at the
Boy,
age of
that's
65
a
or
big if, boy.
66.
Baby boomers can't do it.
Well, baby boomers maybe, but people in our generation, we should be able to do it by the time we're 70.
Yeah, 70 is a more reasonable age. Remember, when they said it at 65, that was about the average life expectancy.
Yeah,
and
that's
the
true.
65-year-olds that quit, most of them were deceased within 10 years. I'm not trying to be cute here. But today, if you make it to 65, the average life expectancy is another 20 years or so.
Wow.
Well,
So, you can't afford it.
I've always heard the argument, though, there are people who have jobs like us who are sitting behind a microphone. It's not very, strenuous on our bodies, or a professor, and then there are
They haven't
people.
met Bill Hess, have they?
Don't go there.
Let's not go there. That's right. But there are people out there who are digging ditches and who are building stuff that body breaks down a lot earlier.
We've always had that, and a lot of people switch careers as they move through life, namely baseball players, which is glamorous, but also people, for example, that install floor tile in your house. By the time they're 40, they're not doing that anymore because it's tough on the knees.
They can't take it anymore.
They can't take it. So we just have to have an economy that makes adjustments for that. That is not an excuse for getting involved in a program that will bankrupt you. If you want to end up like Italy or Greece, keep the retirement age at 66.
I agree. I mean,
Just keep it there. You can't afford it. You have to find
Can we phase it in?
another solution. I know. I understand. You
I
want the
don't.
retirement age to go to 75 the day after you're 66.
Exactly.
There you go.
That's
I
right.
understand the system.
Well, they've already backed it up for me. I mean, so.
Peter,
Well, they backed it up for me. I mean,
the Congressional Budget Office this week has a report that says that this is the longest period of high unemployment since the Great Depression. What does that mean for our generation, or for people who would like to move up from laying floor tile?
Well, it makes it more difficult for anybody to move up, but it is particularly difficult on the very young and the very old. A lot of college graduates, the unemployment rate among college graduates is significantly less than for other people, but they're in jobs that aren't taking them anyplace. That's why they're still living with their mommy and daddy. And that's also why we have a weak new housing market, or a weaker than we should have new housing market, because they can't afford to buy a home. Even at these depressed prices. At the other end, people my age, if they get laid off, if the University of Maryland taps me on the shoulder, even with tenure, if there's no work, they can ask me to leave. My chances of finding another teaching job are about as good as a terrorist.